The UK Games Expo is the third largest tabletop gaming convention in the world, and this year attendance was a massive 88,000, far more than ever before and a huge upward jump from previous years. And I was one of those people. I went there wearing a press badge and came back with 4 difficult questions about how UKGE can adapt as it grows. I've spoken to one of the founders of the convention, I've interviewed volunteers and talked to exhibitors, and I want to share my own insights from the event too. And these are the 4 topics I've been thinking about and looking into. First, how generative AI has affected the creatives in the space, and how UKGE's policy might change next year. Second, how the press can ethically cover these kinds of events in this age of influencer marketing. Third, how large conventions like this can foster a safe and welcoming environment at the hundreds of RPG tables they run. And then finally, some industry insights into the future of TTRPGs. So my first question was, will UKGE change its stance on genAI? What I heard at UKGE was how worried indie creators are at the moment over the larger industry's stance on generative AI. It was a subject of discussion all over the place. There was a grassroots effort to mark the vendors that don't sell genAI content, organised by Steph of Fistful of Crits and Rowan Ruck and Deckard. Customers would ask at stalls if the art on display had been created by humans, and there were at least 2 panels discussing the harm caused by the commercialisation of genAI content. I went to one of those panels, which was organised by Women of TTRPG. The panel agreed that generative AI content is extremely harmful to creators for various reasons, although something that struck me is how optimistic the tone was. There was a lot of discussion about not ostracising the people who do use genAI in their projects, just making it clear that it isn't acceptable and offering them alternatives so that they do have a route back into the community rather than digging into their position. The panel was recorded and I believe should be available on the Women of TTRPG YouTube channel soon, so I'll link to that below. But generally, what I witnessed was such a clear voice from the customers and exhibitors alike that they do not want to share this space with products that might risk the livelihood of genuine creatives, plagiarise their work, and provide a low-quality experience for the players. And yet, UKGE has promoted games that use genAI images and allowed AI assets to be sold on their floor. I saw a number of genAI images on display myself. The creatives and artists that UKGE is meant to uplift have felt hurt and abandoned. They don't feel able to boycott the event entirely, but have organised to protest, sharing their protest signs around the convention that were visible at most of the stalls I visited. And I think it's fair to say the UK Games Expo is behind the curve on this. They are the outliers in the English-speaking tabletop world, behind Gen Con, behind Comic Con, behind Origins, who have all barred AI content from their events. To understand the dispute a little better, I contacted Tony Hyams, a founder and director of UKGE, to ask 2 questions. First, what actually is UKGE's policy regarding the sale of genAI products? And then, do they intend to take a firmer stance against it in the future? Tony told me, quote, UKGE itself does not use or support AI-generated content. We've been trying to work out an actual working policy on exhibitors using AI. He was also aware of how UKGE is lagging behind, saying, quote, I know that other shows have policies and I know that they don't enforce them. They seem to be a box-ticking exercise. We will review what other shows are doing and see what workable policy we can craft that can be enforced. I've seen this concern about enforcement a fair bit in the industry recently, and Tony seemed to think it presented a particularly difficult hurdle for them. Quote, "With 900 plus exhibitors with thousands of products, we have no practicable way to police how they make their stuff, but we, like many, want and do support actual artists." And although he stopped short of making any promises, it seems possible we might get a firmer position next year. Quote, "With the pace of change, I'm sure our next show will have something in place, but being honest with you, I'm not sure what that will look like at this time." Now, I understand people might scoff a little at that response, considering their relatively recent promotion of Gates of Crystallia, so I left that conversation offering up a solution I've seen RPG publishers talking quite a bit about recently, that it doesn't matter if the policy isn't enforceable, just having one sends a strong message about who is and isn't welcome in the space. I hope they do evolve, like Tony suggested, because my perspective is the failure of UKGE to address this problem and listen to their community is a lasting wound in the industry, one that they can still fix. Is ethical press coverage possible in 2026? This is a screenshot of a presentation, or deck apparently, sent to the press corps by a third-party media manager who I won't name. One of the suggestions it gave us was to do a behind the press pass piece. So here we go. These are just some of the very odd talking points and phrases that this deck gave us, like the brilliant hook, "I'm heading to UKGE this year," and scripts to promote the event, like, "There are 3 reasons I'm excited for UKGE this year." This is weird, really weird stuff. But let's back up a little and find out how we got to this point. Sometime after I was accepted for a press pass, I got this email asking me to hand over a lot of data I'd already given, but this time to a third party. To be honest, I thought it was a phishing scam, but it turned out it was legit. Apparently, a press pass puts you into the UK Games Expo Creator and Influencer program, managed by a company who wanted us to essentially reapply, giving them all the same details that we previously had already, as well as more detail about the content we intend to create. It says, quote, "Creator passes are provided in exchange for event coverage." That's the kind of quid pro quo I try to avoid on this channel. It says this third party, by the way not a party I ever agreed to giving my details to, will be tracking our content, and it ended with a soft threat that our press passes might be revoked if we don't hand over this information. This is not acceptable to me, and is not how I feel press coverage should work. They're free to choose who to invite, of course, but the press should be free to decide how and even if they want to cover the event. They shouldn't be telling us to generate controversy before we even get there by saying things like, "Here's why I'm skipping insert big hyped release." They shouldn't be instructing us to use useless hashtags that only exist for them to track us. They shouldn't be telling us to tell our audience to book tickets in advance. They should be better than that. As frankly hilarious as that slide deck is, it's a grim insight into what the switch from traditional press to influencer marketing has brought, and I feel gross for being a part of it. But at least we can have a little laugh at this. And a serious topic here, how can large conventions offer welcoming and safe play environments? There was a healthy gender mix on the trading floor of the expo, but what I saw of the gaming tables in the Hilton were 90% men, including in the more accessible indie-focused games on demand section. So what's that about? Well, I since learned that in 2019, UKGE was at the centre of a scandal that made national mainstream news, when a GM at the event had their player characters sexually assaulted without consent. UKGE apologised and was praised for taking swift action to eject and ban that GM. But this year, a friend of mine had their character sexually assaulted without consent. Now, I'm not suggesting that these were identical incidents, but it motivated me to find out what action UKGE has actually taken to lower the risk and make their events more welcoming. The answer is a bit of a mess and took me down a weird rabbit hole, the hunt for the yellow table. And before I get into it, I want to say that I'm not interested in throwing anyone under the bus here. Everyone I spoke to was lovely and helpful, and the volunteers who GM and organise some of these events take on a lot of unpaid work in very difficult conditions. I've absolutely no issue with any of them. But here we go. Everyone I spoke to or heard from secondhand agreed that GMs are now required to take an orientation course every 2 or 3 years. Different people told me different numbers, but otherwise, that's the most consistent part of this story. Finding out what is actually covered in regard to player safety turned out to be surprisingly impossible. One event organizer assured me that safety is the big important part of the orientation. Everyone else said it's either not covered at all or only touched on in terms of who to contact in an emergency. And that brings me on to the next part of the process, the yellow table. According to the Keeping You Safe page on the UKGE website, each RPG room has a yellow cloth-covered table that identifies a volunteer room captain who any GMs or players can approach with an issue. From what I understand, the room captains are also volunteer GMs, just working a different kind of shift. In 2026, there was also a banner in each room with a phone number of an RPG coordinator. One person told me UKGE requires GMs to cover content warnings and employ in-game safety tools. Everyone else told me they don't. I'll be honest and say I found that all very confusing, complicated, contradictory, and a little disconnected from how safety is usually practiced in my experience. But that's the theory. What about reality? Well, strap in. It turns out not all GMs actually do take the orientation training. There are exceptions to the rule and ways they can fall through the cracks. Unfortunately, I can't say how exactly without identifying info, but this was confirmed by 2 people I spoke to. And what about the yellow table? Nearly every GM I spoke to had no idea what yellow table I was talking about. Only one GM knew about the yellow table since they had been a room captain at some point, but when they turned up to their shift, they found the yellow table fully occupied with an ongoing game. So there was no way for players to find the room captain without interrupting that game to ask where they were. But that would require players to know about the yellow table, and not a single player I spoke to noticed a yellow table or knew what it was for. I also heard a second-hand account that due to volunteer shortages this year, some rooms didn't have a captain. But I couldn't verify that because none of the people I spoke to who had GM'd this year knew what a room captain was in the first place. And what about the banners with the phone number? Well, for my part, I didn't actually notice them. Other people did though. They might have just been easy to miss if you're a bit flustered and rushing to a game, so I'll err on the side of giving that a tick. And what about tools at the table? Well, here's my experience. Only one of the games I played in included content warnings and safety features. None of the players I spoke to had played in a game where safety tools were used, even in games where safety tools were advertised as part of the game on the schedule. The only other people who had seen safety tools being employed were the GMs I spoke to who did so on their own initiative. This is an utter mess. There's a bit of a bureaucratic air to all this, an overly complicated plan that doesn't seem to really reflect the reality on the ground. I reached out to the UKGE organisers to try and confirm a few of these questions I had, like what is included in the training around player safety. Are safety tools actually required to be used by GMs? And what problems have they encountered with the process, like the volunteer shortage? As of the date of recording, I sadly haven't had a response. And I'm just left with this one big question. What is the point? What is the point in the training if not all GMs take it, and those that do don't recall safety being a part of it? What is the point in room captains if people don't know about them or can't find them? What is the point in advertising safety tools in the schedule if they aren't in the game? And what is the point of a yellow table when no one knows what it's for? Because none of this helps my friend. Let's end with some lighter topics, like what does the future of the TTRPG industry look like? On the UKGE trading floor, lots of RPG retailers had dedicated solo sections with racks of books and zines suited for solo play, and solo modes were absolutely everywhere in new releases: board games, card games, RPGs, everything. One of the seminars I went to was a lecture by two academics from York St John and Birmingham universities who are conducting a constructivist study into this rise of solo gaming and what people look for and appreciate about it. It was interesting that, despite having a bit of a board game slant, nearly everything they talked about, people have been saying in my comments section for over a year, about solo play supporting group play, about being able to play at your own pace and style, and being able to appreciate the games you buy, even if you can't get a group together for them. That last point, I think, is quite big for the publishing industry. Traditionally, buying a game comes with a bit of a risk that you won't be able to play it. Having a dedicated solo mode alleviates that risk for the consumer, making them more likely to invest in new games. Doctors Matt and Ryan aren't the only ones interested in this topic. In fact, someone else in the audience for that lecture was Finley Palaniki, a designer I mentioned in my Obscure Games video, who has also worked on some academic presentations on solo gaming. So with more academic interest and wider adoption by mainstream publishers like Free League, it really seems like solo play is being recognised as much more than a transient artefact of COVID lockdowns, but as a serious, standard and beneficial part of the industry. It seems solo is here to stay. And one slightly more anecdotal insight was about the trend towards more packaged games of cards or boxes that people have been talking about recently. Some indie publishers seem to be leaning into this idea, like Black Armada offering a mid-priced box game in Lovecraft-esque, along with card box expansions. Story Brewers Role-Playing offering a big box like Fight with Spirit in the same price range as a traditional hardback, and small card decks at a lower price point. Now, a takeaway I can't confirm but did hear later from one of the bigger publishers at the event was that low form factor books and boxes in the £20 to £35 price range were what sold best overall. If true, and people like Modiphius, for example, were looking at these figures, they would see that Fabula Ultima and Ironsworn Starforge were bringing in better profits than some of their in-house lines like Dreams and Machines and Star Trek Adventures. And were publishers already aware of this phenomenon? Is this what Crossed Paths were thinking in pushing their pocket editions of Brambletrek and Covens of Midnight? Is that a reason I saw far more Cyber Plus Punk boxes than I saw D&D books? Cyber Plus Punk sits squarely in that price range, has a very low form factor and feels like a complete packaged game compared to a book. When people are walking around a convention spending £50 a pop on board games and trad hardbacks, little packages like these seem like an easy purchase. Perhaps the future is partly cards and boxes. But at £130, games like City of Winter are a tall ask compared to these £20 to £50 options. So, to speculate a little, I suspect we might see some of the trad publishers following the indie lead here and trying out more A5 hardbacks as well as boxed and card games in that mid-price range. And to end, here's a bonus question. How cool is the UK indie TTRPG scene? The answer is very. They're close-knit, supportive, diverse and welcoming, with initiatives designed to prop each other up, like the UK Tabletop Industry Network. I kind of feel like I Louis Theroux'd my way into that scene a bit, smiling from the side while the entire UK TTRPG industry hung out together on the Saturday evening. Everyone seems to know each other and have some gossip to share. Most of them, like me, have day jobs to go back to after this. And it's a little surreal. For a few days, the business of TTRPGs was everything and everywhere, and then suddenly it wasn't. It's a tough gig being in this space. I still feel strongly that the dominance of D&D is overstated, that people want to hear more about different kinds of games and aren't being catered to, but it's a difficult task to get those eyes on other games. I know. So please do all the liking and subscribing and all that stuff I always hate to ask for. Do support indie creators when you can. And if you enjoyed this look into the UK RPG industry and feel eager and able to support what I do, please head over to Patreon or Ko-fi.com/CozyRPGreviews, where I'll be running another poll for the next audience pick review slot soon. I hear Golf Quest might be in with a good chance, which is fun. I've left some recommendations for further watching and reading on these topics in the description below, and until next time, happy adventures!